And acupuncture literally discharges that excess energy that gets built up in the body when you have pain, because the pain and survival systems are very intertwined. So patients will leave not only with that muscle spindle reset, but we get a systemic, serotonergic effect, which is a mood enhancing effect, a muscle relaxing effect. So this feeling of, it's the muscle spindle release, it's the reset of the autonomics, it's the activation of serotonin, and it's a strong cascade of opioids, not exogenous, but, endogenous.
Welcome to Beyond the Pain, the podcast that explores what it really takes to break free from chronic pain and reclaim your life. I'm your host, Lee Brandon, and someone who's spent over 2 decades helping people get to the root cause of pain that no one else could explain. Whether you're dealing with long-term back issues, joint pain, nerve discomfort, or mysterious symptoms that just won't go away, this show is here to help you go deeper. Because beyond the pain, there's clarity, strength, and power waiting for you. Each week, we'll uncover the physical, emotional, biochemical, and energetic causes of pain and how to transform them. Let's dive deep into this week's episode. In today's episode, we're diving into a topic that so many people think they understand, but very few truly do, and that's acupuncture. Now, for years, acupuncture was seen as something that you tried after you'd exhausted every other option. But what if acupuncture is actually one of those best tools we have for priming the body to heal? To explore this properly, I'm joined by someone who has spent decades on the front line of both traditional and modern medicine, Mario Mancini. Now, Mario has been educating patients, surgeons, and healthcare providers for more than 30 years and has insights into how the body actually heals, which are nothing short of incredible. In this conversation, we unpack what acupuncture really does, how the meridians relate to physiology, and why it acts like a signal amplifier for recovery. We also go into the role of the immune system, the importance of nervous system regulation, and why lifestyle factors such as digestion, inflammation, and stress often matter as much as the original injury. So if you've ever wondered how acupuncture works, why it helps people recover faster, or how to combine it with breathwork, self-regulation, or other therapies, this episode is going to bring a lot of clarity. So let's get into it. Mario, welcome to Beyond the Pain. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Lee.
Yeah, it's really good to have you here. So for those who aren't familiar with your work, can you share a little bit about your journey? How did you first get into acupuncture and what led you to combine it with neuroscience to help people recover from injuries and pain?
Yeah, I was thinking about, where it all started. And I got to say, for me, it goes far back early on when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I was literally, my mom would call it obsession. It all had to do with just diving into the world of Chinese medicine, Chinese martial arts. But at 6 or 7 years old, watching Kung Fu movies, these legendary Kung Fu heroes for me were my superheroes. And I would sit in front of the TV for hours and just be stuck on this experience that I'm not sure why it was the case, but it was a place for me. I felt at home. And over the years, I continued to dive deeper and deeper into this. Normally an obsession, you would say, would eventually dwindle. But for me, it continued to rev up over the years. And I'd say about 20 years old, 19 years old, I was studying Kung Fu back in New Jersey. And at about 20 years old, 19, 20 years old, there was this Kung Fu teacher that came out to New Jersey and did a weekend seminar for our school. And when I watched him move, it reignited that 6-year-old part of me again. And I immediately knew I needed to study under this teacher. So I moved out to California. And in order to move out of California into California, I had to kind of tell my folks I want to quit school and go to California and study Kung Fu. And that wasn't going to really work. So I realized that in California, acupuncture is primary healthcare. So that was my ticket. So initially it was going to study Kung Fu and then secondarily study acupuncture, Chinese medicine. And I came to realize that Chinese medicine, Chinese martial arts, they're really integrated as one. So when you're studying the arts, you're also studying the medicine. And those early years in California, I was studying Chinese medicine by day and training and eventually competing in full contact fighting with a team. So over time, I started to realize I was on both sides of the medical system. I was on both sides. I was starting to really get a sense of where my place was in the medical system. And I came to realize as an athlete in the ring, getting injuries, traumas, fractures, dealing with the stress of an opponent coming at me, I started to appreciate what a patient would feel like when they're having that same situations, pain, injury, trauma, and stress. And I
Mm.
started to realize that the injured athlete was really no different than the injured patient. And when I started to see that, I started to integrate that mindset, not only for myself, but for my center, for my team, my doctors, and my staff, to start seeing each patient as a performer. So that really led to an appreciation for human performance, looking at my patients from a standpoint of not so much pain relief, and that's why I love just the name of your podcast, Beyond Pain, because it really is beyond pain. And as a performer, as a full contact fighter for years, you had to work through pain, and you have to understand how to self regulate yourself, how to maneuver not only your mindset, but how do you integrate your body, which we call bottom up practices, which in Chinese martial arts are Tai Chi, Qigong, meditation. So my early years kind of created this foundation for me to really get a sense of how I see a patient from a place of self regulation, top down, which means mindset, and bottom up, which means working from the body up. I learned many lessons. Lots of them were through the martial arts, everything from understanding the kinetic chain, integrating how do you move your body more effectively. And these were all principles before I understood the science behind it. I developed it because that was part of the Chinese martial arts. Um, Watching my kung fu teacher move, when he would move in a way that was very connected. You couldn't explain it. I would say the closest thing you would see is if you watch an animal move, they move in a
Mm.
very connected fashion. So that principle came into my own practice and the way I see patient care. Um, Other factors, again, in combat, fighting in the ring, I realized that muscles, and again, this is before I understood the science of it. I discovered that muscles are not just pulleys and levers. They're actually absorbing force, and if those muscles are turned off, as my muscles were when I was, say, kicked many times in the leg, and I started developing knee pain, I came to learn that if my muscles are not working well, that force is going to go into a knee joint and cause pain. So these are little breadcrumbs that I experienced in my fighting career. And then when I started to learn the science of it, it really locked in my understanding of where I wanted the direction of my patient care to go. So that's kind of the brief story of my life in regards to where I am now and how we help our patients currently.
Mm. So I think a lot of people have heard of acupuncture, but don't really understand how it works. So, from your perspective, how does acupuncture influence the brain and nervous system to accelerate recovery?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question I get often every single day, and sometimes people just say they start with the question, "Does it work?" And doing this for about 30 years, I can tell you every day I see patients make changes, and sometimes for me, I have to remind myself that there's nothing in the needle because we live in a world that we have this belief that there's a need to have something outside of us be injected inside of us, but what we want to come to appreciate is the body's own built-in self-repair system. The body has an innate intelligence to self-repair. And simply what the needle does is it reactivates that process. So just from a simple perspective and understanding, a way I explain it to my patients is when you insert a needle into the body strategically, what you're doing is you're activating a very heightened response. The body doesn't know it's an acupuncture needle. And whenever you have any kind of pathology, disease, chronicity of a condition, what we've learned in physiology and pathophysiology is that the body gets stuck in these self-sustaining loops, chronic pain being an example. So what acupuncture does is it literally interrupts these loops. It creates an abrupt turbulence or interruption for a moment so that the body's innate intelligence can come back on board. So it's kind of like you think about, an AED for, the heart, to jumpstart the heart. We're not jumpstarting it with that. We actually are doing it with electrical stimulation, but often just by the needle insertion, what we're doing is we're interrupting that pattern that's been stuck in a self-sustaining loop. When we insert the point, we activate some pretty strong survival mechanisms. One is called the blood coagulation system, the blood clotting system. And when you trigger that system, you pretty much engage all the resources of the body to that location. Now, the interesting thing is that I've been doing this for 30 years, and with patients on Coumadin, warfarin, Plavix, any blood thinners, we don't see any difference between those folks and everyone else because it's such a minute signal, but we're still activating it. So when we do that, we bring a heightened amount of resources to the location, including high amounts of blood flow. We also increase macrophage activity. Those are the immune cells to the location. So we reboot the body's self-repair system in a way that it's not been doing it in that moment. We're reminding the body what it needs to do. Now, a lot of these conditions are habituated. They're like a bad habit. I always tell my patients, it's like a smoke alarm that keeps beeping. And the fire
Mm.
happened a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago. So when we interrupt that signal, we're getting the system to become aware of itself. It's the intelligence that we all have. We don't have to tell a cut to heal. The cut heals, but we do need to clean the interference or the dirt on that cut. The same with acupuncture. When we have these, what we call allostatic loops, which are amplified loops that get stuck, when we interrupt them, we give the body's basic built-in system ability to get back on track and begin to work. Patients will come on a regular basis to keep interrupting that pattern until the body starts to do it on its own. And when that happens, the body does its own thing at that point. So that's the goal here is we have to trigger that self-built-in system. We activate it. We interrupt the pattern. Those maladaptive patterns that occur break up, and then the body's innate intelligence kicks in. It's a natural phenomenon we forget because in today's world, we believe we need to have things outside of us, but most of it's within us.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Question I've got in my very nerdy mind myself
Mhm.
is that you're obviously, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're working on meridians, right?
That's a great question. That has been the misunderstanding uh, in for decades in Chinese medicine because they looked at Chinese medicine as this metaphysical, esoteric, strictly energetic, non-medical perspective. But when you really look at Chinese medicine, specifically acupuncture, it's a flesh and bones medicine. The ancients had lots of opportunities to see how the body works. And when you understand it from a physiological standpoint, there is no magic behind it. When you insert the needle, you are creating a physiological response. Now, in my practice at our center in San Diego, if we did not communicate in the language of science, we would not be able to best support the patient because the medical doctors, the physician's assistants, and the nurses would not understand where our position is in this multidisciplinary approach. And each modality has an influence, either being chiropractic, physical therapy, pain medication, rehabilitation, structural education for the patient. There's just different ways to influence physiology. And the needle insertion is another way in to optimize that communication for the body. So in our center, our communication, there is no language at all about meridians. That's been a misunderstanding. And for us, it's simply blood flow, nervous system, endocrine system function, immune system function. There's tremendous amount of research on it now. And when you use the language of medicine, you can help more people because the medical community can get on board with what you're doing.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I've always thought not all of traditional Chinese medicine, but certainly the acupuncture part was
Mhm.
working predominantly on the meridians. But you're suggesting that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, so when we think about the meridian system, from a energetic model or a communication system model, you can think about it that way because acupuncture crosses the silos of specialties. There's things that's hard to explain from a specialty standpoint because you have everyone in their own camp. And if you have a gastroenterologist, they're going to speak in the area of the digestive system. But the moment goes into, say, the nervous system, you got to get referred. Acupuncture doesn't work that way. It works through communication systems that cross the boundaries, the access points of one system to another. So it's hard to explain in the traditional model how it works at multiple levels. When you look at a meridian model, you can clearly communicate it and language it. But in today's world, especially with our understanding with functional medicine, there's a lot of crosstalk between systems. And this is really where acupuncture shines, is the ability to transfer information from the nervous system to the endocrine system to the immune system. So it's crossing over boundaries because there's no separation. We developed the specialization. So I would say from a standpoint of thinking processes, we can think that way, but communicating that would, I believe, and has in Chinese medicine created a separation in the camps. And the way we work in our center here at the center, we're fully integrated with all the medical groups in San Diego. And one big part of it is when I educate the medical community, I'm speaking in pure physiology. Now, it's interesting because I've done lots of talks. I just did one a couple of weeks ago, and I have nurses coming to me afterward and said, "I never realized that, but it makes sense." Or doctors, you know what? The last time I remember that was in medical school because acupuncture really is not about treating pathology. It's about optimizing, activating function, right? So physiology. So it's a great shift for the medical community to start realizing that we have a very profound or powerful biomedical perspective of acupuncture that can really influence a lot of these other modalities. And language is the primary communication system.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're, again, based on what you just said, you're packaging it in a way that is acceptable to the kind of general medical establishment. This one's for anyone who's ever been told by doctors that everything looks fine, but deep down you know something's not right. That was Trail's story. After 18 months of feeling awful, losing excessive amounts of weight, and watching his health collapse, doctors told him it was all in his head. He felt invisible and scared. We ran tests, made targeted changes, and within a week, he started to feel better. Within 2 months, his health and strength returned, and so did his peace of mind. If you're tired of not being taken seriously, please do not give up. Download the free Chronic Pain Breakthrough Blueprint at www.bodycheck.co.uk/free pain guide, and let's uncover what's really going on.
Yes, yeah. I'm communicating in the language of science, which is the language that we can all understand. There's no belief systems. There's basic physiology. When you insert the needle in, you are going to get a strong signal up into the midbrain, release opioids. The opioids are going to get released to the location site. We're going to activate serotonin levels. There's a physiological response. And if you stay with that language, you can start to communicate to other professions, but you can also know how to optimize those other modalities when they're integrated together with acupuncture. And my most recent book is all about how acupuncture is a force multiplier, but we have to understand it by the same language. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense.
Hmm. Yeah, gotcha. So, well, as you know, there's a growing body of research around acupuncture and neuroscience. What are some of the most, what would you say, exciting insights or discoveries that explain why it works so effectively for things like injury repair and reducing inflammation?
Going back, and thank you. Going back to the initial question about the body's built-in self-repair system, if we come from that place that the body's capacity is there, and when we have conditions in today's world, we're seeing it more and more. We're having conditions that are continuing on. We're seeing more chronic related conditions, which we call allostatic loops. So we have homeostasis, where the body's like a thermostat, always keeping things in regulation. But then we have another system that when we have to push outside of our baseline, that allostatic loop, it's kind of like, example would be, you have an infection and the body produces a fever. The body heats up to burn out the infection. That's an allostatic loop. You start running, the body has to engage the heartbeat to engage that sympathetic activation. That's an allostatic loop. The problem now is lots of these conditions, including pain, they're getting stuck in those feed forward loops, these self-sustaining loops. When that happens, the body, it's difficult for the nervous system to recalibrate back to normal homeostasis or balance. So when you think about acupuncture, again, going back to that initial question, when we are strategically understanding where those chronic loops are and we interrupt those, we are creating an interruption of that maladaptive pattern, because most chronic health conditions are maladaptive. Our body was meant to handle them. So again, my premise is always to go back to basic physiology, understand where the breakdown is, and understand, is that breakdown due to a stuck pattern like that alarm system? Or is it an underfunctioning pattern that the body needs an activation? When we needle strategically, we're interrupting. So if you can think of acupuncture as really an interruption of maladaptive patterns, either being biomechanical, right? Because if there's a muscle spindle that's stuck in a locked state, that person's going to have chronic contraction. With acupuncture, we interrupt that signal and the muscle spindle goes back to normal baseline. We're not putting anything in the body. We're just interrupting that maladaptive pattern and resetting it. So we're basically pattern breakers, interrupters to maladaption. And that there's a physiological basis behind that, and it's straightforward and it makes sense.
Yeah. As you were speaking then, it reminds me, I think 2 or 3 times I've received acupuncture, or I guess the proper term for what I received was dry needling. So it wasn't traditional Chinese medicine. And it would be, I'd have quite a severe kind of like trigger point. I can't tell whether it was my levator scapula or my upper trapezius, but it was around that region.
Mm-hmm.
And, the needle goes in and you just feel this kind of,
Mm-hmm.
it just releases, and you walk out and, feel like a new man again,
Mm.
And, when you were saying, it interrupts the signal to the muscle spindles,
Yes.
that's exactly what came to mind straight away. It was like, yeah, you
Not
just put the
not
needle in.
magic. Not magic.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
straightforward. And there's so many things that are happening in that moment, that feeling of when you said like that peacefulness. We have patients come into our center, they're going to be disgruntled, irritated, agitated, you're in pain, right? So I tell my team, I said, listen, wait till they leave on the other end of treatment and they're in a different state. And that state is a strong, what we call autonomic nervous system state shift. Because when you're in pain, it activates that fight or flight response, right? That sympathetic activation. And acupuncture literally discharges that excess energy that gets built up in the body when you have pain, because the pain and survival systems are very intertwined. So patients will leave not only with that muscle spindle reset, but we get a systemic, serotonergic effect, which is a mood enhancing effect, a muscle relaxing effect. Again, these are all within the body. So this feeling of, it's the muscle spindle release. It's the reset of the autonomics, it's the activation of serotonin, and it's a strong cascade of opioids, not exogenous, but endogenous. So it's a wonderful reminder of what we already have in us.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the other thing to add to my own experience, sometimes when the needle first goes in, it's not such a nice feeling, but after a
Yes.
short period of time, it dissipates,
Yeah, yeah. And
which,
that feeling is a muscle twitch, what you're talking about, that not nice feeling. Because what happens is when we insert, we're jumping the signal because the muscle is stuck. So when we insert, it creates a little contraction and then a reset. So after that, it is what you feel.
yeah, yeah. I remember one time, exactly, again, it's always in my left side, levator scapula trapezius. I mean, I haven't needed it for a long time now.
Hmm.
But actually, I know exactly when the last time I had it because I was going to watch a soccer match 200 miles away with my dad,
Hmm.
and we were on a train, and it was actually the day after the treatment, and I was actually worse the day after.
Hmm.
But when I woke up the next day, it was completely gone. Um, so that was about 12, 13 years ago, I think that would have been. Um, so just getting back to the research
Hmm.
on acupuncture. Um, so how does that relate to neuroscience as well?
So, when we think about neuroscience, we're really just having a deeper appreciation and understanding of systems that basically work on a daily functional basis that we don't think about. And it really comes down to what I call a parasympathetic sympathetic shift. And let me use the example of your left shoulder, for example. Patients come in, they have this chronic left trapezius pain. Now, this pain is not just something just happened recently. You have a tendency, yourself and many people, tendency to have a guarding response in that area. Because when you're in a world that's constantly demanding of us, we are sympathetics, which doesn't understand the difference between real and perceived threat. You're taking in a lot of input, a lot of data, right? And the system starts to pull up. So the shoulders start to come up. And you don't need to be a martial artist to know that if you hear a loud sound or attack, you're going to do this. But that's a natural response. Now, if you chronically have the shoulders going up, doing the work, and then you're on the computer all day, and then you have other hits, this area gets locked. So you have this constant self-sustaining loop. Okay, we're going to keep coming back to that same principle. It gets stuck. It's maladaptive. In today's world, we have so much inflow that our nervous systems are not adaptive enough unless you do the work and it gets into a guarding response. And when that happens, you get an accumulation of tension. Now, if you go deeper in there, there's a lot of lactic acid buildup. So to answer your question, the day after I felt worse, and then the day after that I felt better. Well, when you have a contraction that's been holding for months or years, and you reset that spindle that's been stuck, you are going to release lactic acid. It's kind of like you got a good workout, a really good workout just here. And
Mm,
we communicate that to our patients. Say, listen, you may notice some soreness like you just worked out, but I can tell you that is a good response. But I also tell them we don't want you to suffer. So we give them some ways to manage it, to move them through it. Because a lot of times in today's world, we go to our doctor because we don't want to feel anything. We want to numb out, disconnect, give me the pill. And right on the front end with our patients, we communicate to them that this is a relational medicine. It requires your part. And we're not going to numb you out. You're going to feel things, but the end game is you're going to get stronger. The pain's going to go away, but you have to move through it. So you are going to feel that. So we prep the patient. So once you understand that, patients start going, okay, I understand my nervous system. I've been in this fight or flight response. They acknowledge it. They go, yeah, I've been stressed for a long time. We teach them self-regulation practices to help recalibrate that nervous system so that we can help them become more empowered in their own health.
mm. Yeah, one way, if you look at the human body, our nervous system is a little bit like an electrical system.
Hmm.
And when you've got pain in a particular body, there's obviously almost an excess of charge, if you like.
Hmm.
Uh, and what I've seen happen, someone might start with pain in one place and it just gets too much. So then it actually just moves to another part of the body. And before you know it, they've got a diagnosis of something like fibromyalgia, right? Where it's just pain everywhere. But from what you've been saying, it sounds like, acupuncture almost discharges the signal, if you like, almost like, tripping the fuse box kind of thing.
Hitting the reset button. I tell my patients, you're creating a discharge. It's like hitting the discharge button. And what you said is really well said, because it is accumulation of mobilized energy that gets activated through pain or a stress response, and it doesn't get released. So when you think about, you ever watch National Geographic and you see the tiger or the lion running after the gazelle or the zebra, and the animal makes it. If you watch the animal, you're going to see twitches. You're going to see air shaking. They're going to twitch it off. You see two ducks fighting. They move away and they flap their wings. They shake it. We call it shaking it off. I tell my patients, I say, listen, everyone has a different arena. When I was fighting, if you watch a boxer, have you watched boxing or MMA, any of that, any of the fighting?
Yeah.
You see, they're in the corner and they're bouncing and shaking. Why are they doing that? Because they know there's so much energy, like you just said, building up in the system, that if you don't shake and bounce and breathe, exhale, 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 activating that, what we call a vagal brake, you're going to have too much energy in the system. And when you have too much energy in the system that you can't regulate, you either go into a freeze response, which means the body will lock up, not good when you step in the ring, or a flight response, and you're not going to run out of the ring. So you have to step into it. So I will literally remind my patients that they are competitors, they're athletes in their own ring or arena, and they have to regulate and discharge that energy. And what acupuncture does is it really, when we interrupt those patterns that are stuck, we're interrupting it, we're discharging energy. Again, this is not metaphysical and magical. We're actually releasing tension, because tension's energy built up. When we release that, the body begins to self-regulate. And when the body begins to self-regulate, it not only works better, but the patient's frontal lobe comes back online and they can think better. They're happier. They can have perspective, and they're going to listen better. And if we have a patient that listens, they'll do the things that are best for them, which is what we want. So it's a wonderful experience when you discharge it at the level of the body, but also at the level of the brain. It's a powerful experience that I see every day with acupuncture.
Just a quick pause to share one of the most inspiring comebacks I've seen. Michelle was a top-ranked swimmer whose shoulder pain was so bad, even after surgery, she was told to retire. She was heartbroken, but she had one goal left: win gold at the European Championships. We worked together to build her strength, correct her posture, and optimize her recovery. Not only did she win gold, but she also set a European record and kept competing pain-free. If someone's told you to give up on your goals because of pain, don't accept that as your story. Download my free chronic pain breakthrough blueprint at www.bodycheck.co.uk/free pain guide, and let's write a new chapter together. Now, I know you've described acupuncture as a signal amplifier, which I think is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Can you unpack that a little bit? For instance, what exactly is being amplified, and how does that make a difference for someone recovering from, injury or pain?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lee. When I think of it as a single amplifier, I really look at it as an optimization tool for other modalities. So, for years, 30 years ago, acupuncture in my practice was try everything else and then try acupuncture. 30 years later, now we're seeing acupuncture as a frontline therapy, because I've been educating the community for 30 years, which my book supports. And what we're doing is we're priming the body. Think of it this way. When the systems are maladaptive, either overactive in a self-sustaining loop, stuck in a chronic pain cycle, or underactive, the system needs activation. When we use acupuncture, we reset the system. So, for example, with pain medication, acupuncture's mechanism of action is through the endogenous pain control system. The research is there. When you needle, you activate the midbrain, you release endogenous opioids. When you reset that pathway, in other words, you clear interference, you interrupt maladaptive patterns, that system begins to work better. Now, as that system works better and you introduce a medication into a system that works better, you're going to have a stronger effect from the medication. It's not that the medications are stronger, it's entering a system that's optimized to receive the medication. So therefore, their medication is going to not be needed as much for not as long, and you have less side effects because medications have a place. They will reduce suffering, but they do interrupt function to get there. Like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, NSAIDs like Advil here in the States, Motrin, they're going to do the job, but they are going to interfere with the inflammatory response of the body. And inflammation is not the bad guy. Inflammation is part of the healing response. It's when inflammation becomes stuck in a pattern, maladaptive. So when we introduce the NSAIDs into a body that's primed, you're going to need a lot less for less time. When that happens, you prime the body for the meds. Physical therapy, same principle. We talked about those muscle spindles. If a person has an injury and they start getting physical therapy, active based, and their spindles are in a locked state, they're going to have a tendency to flare up. But if you integrate it with acupuncture and we interrupt those spindles back to baseline, that muscle can contract easily for strengthening and it can lengthen for range of motion practices, right? Chiropractic, same thing. With chiropractic adjustments, you're going to have these adjustments not flare up and they're going to hold a lot longer because, again, I'm going to go back to the spindle, right? And then when it comes to surgical, post-surgical, big one, and we do a lot of work with surgeons here in town. Post-surgical, all the things we talk about with conservative therapy, it's also happening post-surgical, but it's in a tighter window, right? And I want to add one thing. Post-surgically, one highlight that I like to make is with the surgery, you get the environment well prepped and done, right? And then it's like, now we have to rehab it. Where acupuncture shines the most amongst all the other benefits with improving rehab and spindle effect, one of the key things that I really like to highlight with surgeons is when we needle, we are flipping the switch in the immune system. We're causing what are called M1 macrophages, which are inflammatory, to flip into M2, which are anti-inflammatory. Now, that pathway from inflammation to reduce inflammation, that pathway also is a tissue regeneration pathway, which means post-operatively, when you incorporate acupuncture, you're optimizing remodeling of that area that had surgery. So it is in their best interest, the patient, to get acupuncture post-operatively to optimize, to increase the effects of the remodeling, the improvement of the tissue itself, so they can rehab through it. So that's where I say signal amplifier. It optimizes and primes the body so that whatever modality you're using, it's just simply going to work better. Bottom line, it's going to work better. And it does. And I've seen this for years. I was waiting for the research to come out. And when it came out, that's where I jumped on and created the book. You put the book together so that our doctors and our patients really see the value of acupuncture, not as an alternative, but as a force multiplier. And that's the primary focus there. Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I was thinking of, when you were saying, someone possibly won't need as much medication or the medication might work better.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, what does that do when you take on macro and micronutrients?
And that's a wonderful question because, when we talk about optimization, we're talking about optimization not only of the area of the injury, and it's important because patients come into our facility and they're coming in for neck pain, they think of us as the neck pain doctors. They don't see beyond that. And that makes sense because we live in a specialized field of medicine. But again, the body doesn't work in silos. So when a patient comes in and we assess them and they are having a chronic neck condition and they are having digestive issues, we know right away that their absorption capacity for proteins that get, converted into anti-inflammatories, tissue rebuilding are not going to be optimized. We are going to incorporate needling acupuncture for points to help optimize gut function. So that's a person that we see right away that they need support. Now, when we're treating patients, we're always thinking about how do we optimize the delivery of resources to the location. So when it comes to micronutrients, digestion, if you're not improving digestive resources, you're going to have a reduced effect on the neck recovery. So we're always thinking local and systemic. So optimizing, improving the body's ability to get resources is essential. So any kind of delivery of nutrients in the body through oral or medications are going to get delivered to that area more effectively with acupuncture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's kind of what I thought would have been the case.
Mhm.
Now, I know you also integrate self-regulation tools like breathwork into your approach. How does combining that with acupuncture enhance healing outcomes for your clients and patients?
It is for me almost, I'm getting to the point I'm going to call it a non-negotiable. Now, again, I'm not that hardcore with putting it on the patient, but in my own mind, if we don't understand how to self-regulate our nervous systems, almost all treatments will be temporary. Because if the system itself doesn't have the capacity to self-regulate, then everything becomes short-term, including a surgery, including medication, PT, chiro, and acupuncture. So what I do with patients is once we get them in a more regulated state, and that may take one treatment, may take a few treatments, but there's a point that the patients start to realize and acknowledge that calming, centering, relaxed, alert state that we're striving for with acupuncture. In addition to the pain, okay, so we always focus on the pain, but so I'm not a psychologist, but I look at myself as a state tracker, assessing states. So when a patient comes in and they're telling their story, I'm listening in on, is there a hypervigilant component of sympathetics? Is there a dorsal disconnect of withdrawal, hopelessness, helplessness? And by understanding that state, I understand how to help them regulate. When we treat them with acupuncture, we're creating a strong reset for the system. So post treatment, their body over time becomes regulated. In that moment, we start to integrate self-regulation practices like breath work. If the patients are open to it, things like Tai Chi, Qigong, mindfulness practices. But I've found that everyone has had some type of self-regulation practices in their life, but they don't call them self-regulation practices. It could be prayer. It could be, there's a time I go every day, take a walk and it becomes my place. Whatever they do, what I do is I look at that and I say, okay, the acupuncture treatment is giving you a homing device to know what to look for, that calm, relaxed state. And the more you can get into that place throughout your day, the more you're hitting the reset button throughout your day and your life. I literally give my patients little stickers that say breathe. And it's a reminder to just slowing down the breath allows the nervous system to go into a restorative state. We don't need to stop and go, okay, I need to breathe. We're breathing anyway. So it's just about awareness to downshift the nervous system. So self-regulation is an essential element to optimize health, growth, restoration, and repair. And the more the patient integrates that in their own practice, the more you're going to maintain the effects of acupuncture, the more they're going to have better effects with medications, surgery, post-operative, and so on. So self-regulation is such an essential foundation for patients because they start to realize their own self agency. They're starting to realize that they have the capacity to be a big part of their own medicine. So we stop looking outside of ourselves and start to work from the inside out. And we need more of that in today's world because it's too easy to take that phone and look for the next best thing. That's okay. But the moment we forget what we have, then we start losing power to it. And this is my communication to each one of my patients.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the acupuncture, and from the patient point of view, the acupuncture is the passive part of the process, and then the breath work or whatever kind of self-regulation they do is the active part. It's where they're taking responsibility for themselves. It's where you're teaching them to fish rather than giving them a fish. Right?
Perfectly
The
said.
old analogy.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had quite a few people talk about breath work recently on the show. And what's quite interesting, the system that I've used for about 24 years now, we look at this, what we call the 6 foundations of health. And they come in a hierarchy. So the most important one is your mind, your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Most important thing. Number 2 is breathing. Number 3 is hydration. Number 4 is nutrition. Number 5 is movement, which could include Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, etc. And 6 is sleep and circadian rhythms. I've kind of added my own number 7 to the 6, and that's detoxification, whether it be physical detoxing, heavy metals, etc., or even things like electromagnetic radiation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, breathing, and also we have what's called a totem pole of hierarchies as well, where we look to find the root cause of someone's issue.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1 is psyche. Number 2 is breathing. Right?
Always comes back to that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't last very long without it, do we?
No. And I remind my patients, I go, if you don't think breathing is important, hold your breath and then you'll find out soon. Yeah. And you mentioned, the psyche, again, I'm always thinking about regulation, self-regulation practices, and there's top-down regulation. It means how we think will download into the body. It's pretty obvious. There's a lot of research out there. What you think all day long, what you speak all day long. A lot of people don't put a lot of credit to that, but once they start to realize that practice, it really starts to shift the body. And then breath work is a very unique top down, bottom up, because you don't have to think about breathing. Breathing happens. That's bottom up. The moment you put awareness on breath, it's a very unique paradox because it's really bottom up, top down. So it's almost the closest link between the two that creates a very powerful alignment in the body. So I do put a lot of attention on breath work, especially what we call vagal breathing, which is slow exhales to shift the body into a calm state. So over time, patients start to notice it. People are looking for the quick fixes, but I can tell you it's not the quick, as you know, as a practitioner yourself, it's not the quick fixes. It's the little small stakes practice that you do every day that build up over time. And that's the practice. So I bring awareness to patients about breath, and then I say, let's start to bring awareness on certain times in your day to do that. And over time, you start to see their overall demeanor shift. And when that happens, they're starting to self-regulate. We try to get that in them in a way that's not overwhelming.
Let's take a moment to talk about Billy. His story is one so many athletes and active people can relate to. Billy was a semi-pro rugby player plagued by recurring leg pain and groin issues for 3 years. No matter what he tried, massage, stretching, acupuncture, the pain kept coming back. He was stuck in a cycle of hope, flare up, and rest. We worked together during his off-season to get to the root cause. Now Billy's halfway through his current season. He hasn't missed a single game. No pain, no flare-ups, just better speed, strength, and confidence. If you're fed up with short-term fixes, grab my free chronic pain breakthrough blueprint at www.bodycheck.co.uk/free pain guide. Let's break the cycle and build something lasting. Yeah, I mean, looking at or considering people that are in constant pain or certainly suffering persistent pain, their thoughts are always about pain, right? They're
Hmm.
constantly thinking about pain. So that's a stress. So what does stress do to your breathing? It increases your breath rate. What does breath rate do? It stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, and you're just on a vicious cycle,
Right.
right?
Self-sustaining maladaptive loop.
So if you can take time out and say, right, let's do some breath work, well, then you can work on it from both ends, because that will help with your psyche as well,
That's right.
right? So
Top
that's
down,
what you were
bottom up.
saying, is top down, bottom up, right? So yeah, absolutely, absolutely crucial.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So from your experience, what do you wish more doctors, physical therapists, and even lawyers working in injury cases understood about the true potential of acupuncture in modern injury care?
Yeah. So, one of the most important things that we have to understand with acupuncture is it's not just the needling itself, but it's the practitioner providing the modality, and understanding that if we can help the patient's nervous system find a level of safety, okay? And when we say safety, it gives them a little bit of a space for the nervous system to see its capacity to heal. We're going to start to empower our patients more. We're going to give them that sense of self-agency. And when you have a patient that has a sense of, I can do it, you're going to have a stronger effect. You're going to have a patient that's going to follow the directions of their doctor, their attorney, what's required of them. And what acupuncture does is it really allows that to happen. And I'm going to say to that same point, when we think about acupuncture, we want to be thinking about the human experience. And I think that's the biggest thing that's missed in these, you know, pay, you know, injury care and multidisciplinary approach. We're looking at all the parts of the body, but there's a human experience side that we have to keep coming back to. And if the community at large, in addition to the medical community, can understand that acupuncture affects multiple systems at once, it affects the brain and the body, it affects the patient's mood and emotional state through serotonin levels. It helps reset the autonomic nervous system so that you're in a calm, regulated state. It primes the body. I'm going to say the biggest thing with acupuncture is if the community can see acupuncture as a central hub of optimization for all modalities, you're going to see better results across the board. And the human experience is not ignored, so that the patient feels that they're part of the process, because the patient has to realize there's nothing in the needle. And any change that occurs, it's their own resources. So when you have a patient start to make that connection, you have a bigger change across the board, because they become the center of integrative care, which is the core of what we teach our patients, that they are the center. No matter what I tell them, whatever I provide to them, if they don't listen to their own body, then they lose their power.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the magic isn't in the needle; it's in the person's response to the needle. And the analogy that I had in my head is, you know, a dumbbell doesn't grow muscle, right? It's
Yes.
the response. It's the response to the stress
Well said.
of
Well
your
said.
of your body that helps build strength and muscle. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm all for empowering people when it comes to their own health, rather than them relying on someone for their health. And I don't want to go down the whole rabbit hole, but it didn't go too well for a lot of people over the last 5 or 6 years. But that's a whole
It's a
nother episode.
another episode. And at the same time, we do need to have that co-regulation. We need to have that capacity to, just like the failure to thrive for an infant, it needs the mother. We're all babies, as we're still humans, right? And humans were wired to connect. So any patient that walks into our center, immediately first thought is there's some type of dysregulation, there's some type of maladaptation, there's some type of lack of self-regulation. That's like the premise when people come in. So they need co-regulation. They need some type of connection, and connection is medicine. There's been so much research out there on that if we don't really optimize that, we're not really going to get the best results. So uh, I know that, my doctors know that, my team understands that. So when a patient walks into the center, everyone knows your name. They feel safe. They feel connected. They're walking and smiling into our rooms because the team, the administrative team, is already priming the patient to be in a state to receive treatment. And we don't see that enough in the medical system. And it's my hope that we become an example for other medical groups and the medical system at large, start to realize that biopsychosocial model, which is now slowly, like a snail, but it's slowly entering the world of medicine, which is what Chinese medicine has been about. We call mind body medicine for, 3,000, 2,000 years. So I'm excited about the direction it's going, and I'm excited that I'm part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, going back to, how important connection is to your health. I don't know if you know about the orphanages that used to exist in Romania, maybe 20, 30 years ago. And there was, I think it was a British charity went to Romania to help with these orphans, and they couldn't speak. They couldn't interact. They were just almost non-human. And, they said, what's been going on here? Like, why are these babies and children like this? And they were like, we don't know. And so, well, what do you do with them? Well, we feed them. Like, what, do you not pick them up? Do you not touch them? Do you not cuddle them? No, we don't
Mm,
do that. Right.
mm,
And they were extremely unwell because they didn't have that natural human connection.
that's
Right.
right.
I
Yeah,
mean, we know that, our hearts have an electromagnetic field that, is at least 6 feet away from our bodies, right?
that's right.
All the way around.
That's right.
If you're not sharing that with someone else, if no one's having that experience from someone else at all, well, no wonder they're going to be, in a pretty bad way.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
We
I
we yeah
completely.
we live in a mechanistic. Well, we have had quite a long period of mechanistic medicine, more mechanical. The body is a machine, and now we're starting to see the science of what heart math is doing and heart coherence. And I tell my team we're a mobile heart spot. So it starts with us as a team at the center, at my center, to make sure that we're regulated first, so we could be safe harbors for our patients. And on that note about connection, I was just sharing with my team the other day about a study done called the Rosetta effect. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Rosetta is a place in Pennsylvania in the United States. And when you looked at this culture, and they were from Italy, somewhere in Italy, they might have been
Mm,
Sicilians, I'm not sure. They
mm,
they they were in Rosetta, and when you look at the culture in Rosetta, Pennsylvania, it looked like it was a race to see who can get heart disease first, eating,
mm,
drinking, smoking, all that. But what the interesting thing was that when you look at the rate of heart disease in Rosetta, they had the lowest level of heart disease, and they couldn't make sense of it until they realized that it was the community. It was a sense of belonging. It was a sense of understanding. It was a feeling that I am part of something. I'm heard, and that type of awareness of connection is such a big part that is not being used as much as it should. And if you just kind of come from that place of understanding that connection itself is medicine. Now, in that same study, the folks that left Rosetta, they started to have the heart disease. They started having those other issues. So I'm not recommending anybody eat, bad food and drink and smoke and all that. But what I'm saying is connection is medicine. And that's where we start in our center, to make sure that we stay connected with our patients, to optimize their system for repair, to prime their system for repair.
yeah, yeah, that's great. So if someone's watching or listening to this and they're struggling with persistent pain, what message would you want to leave them with?
One of the biggest messages when it comes to chronic pain, and we now know this through the biopsychosocial model, is that the longer someone has pain, factors outside of the initial tissue trauma play bigger roles. They amplify and sustain it. So when we see that in chronic pain, I would say this: start looking at other factors in your health that could be amplifying it. In other words, running your blood work and finding out if there's inflammatory markers, if you have digestive issues, if your lifestyle is driving a stress response. So for us, the biggest thing I see in patients is that fight, flight, or sympathetic activation. And then it becomes self-sustaining. It starts to amplify the pain. There's nothing, the injury has resolved to the level it can, but the signal itself is amplified because people don't realize that diet plays a big role in amplification of pain. So paying attention to your diet, lifestyle, exercise, nutrition, get away from the fixation of, I need to find the doctor who can find the problem in the area that I am having pain, because it may not just be here. It might be what I call the biopsychosocial model, looking at every other factor of why this is going on. And that's the way we look at it in our center. And that's the biggest takeaway I would say for patients, is to go beyond the location and start to look at other factors.
Mm. Yeah, I really like the fact that you mentioned how, food can have an effect on pain. It just so happens early next year, I'm bringing out a short course for people to identify and replace the foods that cause pain. So stay tuned, everyone, for that.
Perfect. We need more of that.
Yeah. So Mario, what's next for you?
What's next for me? Right now, I am working on the second edition of my book, breaking through the pain stress, breaking through the pain stress cycle to optimal health. My first edition was about 20 years of my practice. I dumped it out of my head and get out into a book. And then the pandemic came, and those 3 to 4 years was an upgrade on teaching patients self-regulation practices. So my second edition, which is an update with pandemic lessons, is going to be coming out next year. And infused in the entire book from the first edition is self-regulation practices that people can incorporate, that I had to really increase my teaching during that period of time. So the second edition is and will be a very powerful way to help patients incorporate things in their life that will help them move beyond pain and stress. And using that stress, by the way, not in a way to manage it, to disconnect from it, but understanding, how do you transform that survival system into life performance? You look at a high-level athlete, they're not managing stress. They're learning how to convert it into flow. And so a lot of my own personal practices are in the book about not to stop stress. Stress is not the bad guy. Stress is just unregulated or dysregulated energy. When you regulate it, you'll start to tap into your own potential. And that's what the book's about.
Awesome. And where can people find your current book, and where else can people find you online?
So our current book is on Amazon, Biomedical Acupuncture. Basically, it's enhancing accident and injury care. It's on Amazon. My center, the Center for Integrative Care in San Diego, they can pull us up online. Maybe we'll have some links on the podcast.
Sure.
Yeah. And if they can just reach out to us, we're here ready and willing to help.
Awesome. Mario, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure people listening and watching to this would have got a lot from it too.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Lee. I really appreciate the time.
And I just want to congratulate you for having the most Italian name in the universe.
Hey, it's the connection of Marco Polo back in the day. There's some kind of DNA connection, so maybe it's that.
Awesome. So that's it from Mario and me for this week. But be sure to tune in, same time, same place, next week on Beyond the Pain. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Pain. If this episode resonated, please follow the show, leave a review, or share it with someone you know who's been struggling. And remember, pain is not permanent. With the right insight and support, you can turn it into power. Until next time, stay open, stay strong, and keep moving beyond the pain.